Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, my friends, the Supreme Court has weighed in. They have weighed in on the Voting Rights Act, and they have ruled in Louisiana versus Callais that race cannot be the primary determining factor when drawing congressional districts. The left is in a tizzy about this, claiming that this disenfranchises voters and that this is dangerous to our democracy. I've even seen former President Barack Obama weigh in, talking about how terrible this is. None of this is true, by the way. What is true is that we are restoring principles that have been ignored in this country for a long time. Constitutional principles, the proper role of the courts, the proper role of state legislatures, what must be required of states, how that can be done, and so forth. And we're going to go through that today. You're going to get more background here today than you will on any of the major media outlets. They just want you to be outraged by this for reasons the average person can't even begin to explain. So we'll talk about that today. We'll also talk, it's related but not exactly, Florida has quickly, showing Indiana Republicans, by the way, showing Hoosier Republican senators in specifically here, how this is done, passing a measure to redistrict in Florida and picking up potentially, of course, you never know until Election Day whether this is actually what happens or not, but picking up maybe 4 seats for Republicans in the Sunshine State and doing it perfectly in accordance with their state's rules. They've got the prerogative. We've been through this. They've got the political power, and they are exercising that power constitutionally and within the confines of the law, just like Hoosier Republicans could have done, yet refused to do so because they are too, I don't know, it's a combination of being too wimpy or having, well, I would say weaponized, the opponents, the other side weaponized a misperception of what was virtuous here. Fair. Oh, it's not fair. Oh, my goodness, you're not being fair to the Democrats by letting them have two seats, 2 districts that they have an advantage in Indiana. I don't know why this is so appealing. I don't know why people feel so good about this. Meanwhile, they watch as America's youth are totally being destroyed by these policies. Their lives are being upended and ruined in many ways. The economy, of course, is under extreme pressure. We had extreme inflation during the Biden years. Now we've got, of course, a war that is putting pressure on oil prices, which is driving gasoline prices through the roofs, which is bad. Of course, if you want to know the real culprit, I don't want to talk about this today. I've talked about this before. The real culprit in gas prices, if you want to get down to it, into the nitty-gritty, look into the taxes, my friends. The taxes for this. You pay taxes on all this gasoline and diesel fuel, and yet you still have to pass laws in Congress for infrastructure, for roads and bridges to be built. Well, what is happening? What is happening with all the money that you get from tax on fuel, on gasoline? State governments, even federal government, what happens to it? I mean, I've driven on I-70 here, which goes pretty much just north of Monrovia. This is the worst stretch of road I think I have ever seen in my life. And to call this an interstate highway right now is dangerous. In fact, the truckers, there's signs up. I think they're still up. They were up. It was telling truckers to get in the fast lane, presumably because the slow lane, the right lane, looks as though it's been bombed there's potholes, and it is a disastrous situation. But we've had some real problems. Our government, by the way, is again, it does everything it shouldn't be doing. It doesn't focus on the core of what we actually gave it our approval, our consent to do. Instead, it wants to do bigger and better things, making a mess of everything that's government in general. Of course, a lot of this is beginning to be cleaned up, and some of it is being cleaned up, of course, by the administration. Some of it is being cleaned up here by the Supreme Court, which we'll talk about here today, my friends, as the program comes together. Let's face it, there are a lot of companies out there that don't share your Christian values. The good news is that you don't have to invest in them. At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. They'll help you screen out companies that go against your faith and your values and help create a plan that's tailored to your specific goals. And they'll handle the heavy lifting for you so you can focus on what really matters. Now, if you want to see how your current investments align with your values, to see if you're funding things that go completely against what you believe in, or maybe you're funding things that are in complete alignment with your faith, which would be a good thing. You can go to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. Take a quick and easy assessment, and they will give you the reports as to where your investments are going, what they are supporting. 48 Financial, because your values matter, and of course, my friends, so does your money. So let's go through here. Let's go through what the Supreme Court, ruled yesterday regarding this Louisiana versus Callais case. So let's go back in time. The state of Louisiana, give the background here. The state of Louisiana has 6 congressional districts. You know, as listening to this program, as one who's paid attention during high school civics or government class, whatever they call it today, if they have it. If you had a teacher that was teaching you anything, you know that the United States of America, each of the 50 states, or if you prefer, the 57 states Obama has counted, each of the 50 states has 2 senators, every state, regardless of its size. And so those 2 senators, that makes 100 because there's 50 states. 100 senators go to the U.S. Senate. Every state has the same amount of representation. Now, I will tell you, and I've harped on this before, this is like spitting into the wind, but when the founders set up our system, the founders said senators, U.S. senators, were going to be elected by state legislatures, which was a very smart way to set this up. This, of course, was stricken down, I should say, by a constitutional amendment. Now the people of the states directly elect senators as well. I think this is a bad idea. I think that it's created problems because there is a different type of accountability and pressure when you're held accountable to the population and when you're held accountable by the state legislature. Both of those, by the way, are either it's direct representation of the voter either through their legislature or through their own vote. So it's a smart way to do it, but it was taken down. In fact, if you go back and look at the arguments for why it was taken down, at the time people were complaining about how corruption could be involved, as though it's not involved in the electing of representatives through the direct vote. I mean, of course, anything can be corrupted. Our job is to try to keep as much light shining on what's happening in Washington, D.C., in our state houses and so forth as possible. But nonetheless, that was the former way of doing things. Now, of course, we elect our senators directly as well. It really is. It's something that's not talked about a lot, but it really is a dangerous deviation from what the Constitution set up brilliantly, if you ask me. But anyway, in addition to that, states, of course, have a certain number of representatives. Now, the number of representatives a state has, the number of Congress people, members of Congress, the number of seats they have, is based upon that state's population, and that state's population is calculated every 10 years through the U.S. Census. And so there will be another census taken here in 2030. We're right in the middle, just a little bit north of the middle as we move towards 2030. So what happens is there's a fixed number of senators. They capped it at 435. And so basically what happens is you take your state's population, you take the total population of the United States of America, you look at what portion of the total population is in your particular state, and then you say whatever, roughly, I mean, you can't have fractions of representative seats in your state, but you say, look, if California is, I don't know, let's say it's 12% of the population, I'm just picking a number, then they get roughly 12% of the representatives. And then it's the job of the states to then say, okay, we kept the same number of representatives from the last census. Maybe we gained a seat or two. Maybe we lost a seat or two. This is, by the way, where you'll see people moving from blue states into states like Texas and Florida. You'll see those states are growing. States like Illinois, I think, are on the decline. New York is on the decline population-wise. And candidly, it's because of their policies, especially when you've got a communist running the city, the largest city in New York City, the largest city in America. Communists running that city. People are flocking out of that state into places that are more reasonable when it comes to how they tax them. You may have seen this, if you've been paying attention to the news, you might have seen Zoran Mamdani out there filming TikTok videos or whatever in front of a billionaire's property, basically telling voters, telling residents of New York how he's going to stick it to the wealthy who own these big properties, these second homes and so forth. And it's going to come back to bite them in a major way. In fact, it already has come back to bite them. But this is how the process is done. And so every 10 years, a state has to redistrict because in addition to looking at your state's total population, you also have to look and say, here's where the population lives within my state, and your districts have to be roughly the same size so that each member of Congress, each district that's drawn, represents has the same number of people in it, approximately. There's no official perfect way to do this. And so districts will change every 10 years. Maybe there's times that they don't change at all. Maybe they change slightly. They'll change in a major way if your state gains or loses a seat. So that's what's happening, of course, with states like Indiana, because there were calls by Trump for Indiana to redistrict. You would have heard me talk about this a lot. I've been incredibly disappointed in our state senators. And by the way, I would recommend, I'm on the side of Turning Point USA here. I'm on the side of the Trump administration. I'm on the side with Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith here. I don't know where Braun, if he's out there pushing this as well. I think he might be. But if your senator, if the person on your ballot, I'm talking to Hoosiers right now, bear with me, I'm talking to everybody outside of this in a moment. But if you're a Hoosier and your state senator did not vote to redistrict, I think you should vote that person out. I do. I think that you should find new representation for you. Election day is next week. You can still do early voting between now and then. And I recommend that you do that. Recommend that you vote these folks out. And Rod Bray, my state senator, he'll be on the ballot in 2028, and I'll be talking about that in due course as well as we get to that point, because these folks don't understand what we're up against. They don't understand that the left will do whatever it takes, as long as it takes them, so long as it takes Trump out of the White House. But take Trump out of it for a minute. They'll do whatever it takes, as long as it takes them, to remake this country into something that they find much more appealing, which candidly is not what the founders crafted. The left hates this country as founded. I know that is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks, but that's the truth, my friends. They hate liberty. They love power. They love to tell people what to do. They think they've got the answers. They believe in technocracy. where the experts make the rules and the rest of us just go along. They have no affinity or love for liberty like people like me and the vast majority of you do. And so it's just time. They don't know what we're up against. They're fighting a different battle. They may not be fighting a battle at all. And so that's what I think about that. But I also think when I look out across what's happening around the country, states are, some states understand this. The state of Florida, which I mentioned earlier, they understand that they have to increase representation for reasonable people, limit the amount of political power so much as you can by law and according to your power. Because again, districts can be drawn if you follow the Constitution, and we all should. Districts can be drawn, or districts are supposed to be drawn by state legislatures. Now, state legislatures around the country have handled this a bunch of different ways. Sometimes they do it directly, which is really how it's supposed to work. But they can decide to say, hey, we're going to hand this responsibility over to some blue ribbon commission, and that makes people feel better because, hey, they say they're nonpartisan and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. There's no such thing, my friend. In fact, when you run for school board, you don't put your party affiliation on there because it's supposedly nonpartisan. Bet me it's nonpartisan. Did you see, by the way, there's a school district not too far from me that made TikTok, what is it, Libs for TikTok, or no? What's that? Is that Libs of TikTok? There we go. She found a video of a poster in a class at Columbus School. I don't know if it was middle school. I want to say it was middle school, but I could be mistaken. And there's a poster basically that is asking kids to put their gender identity and it looks like sexual preference because students are putting non-binary, this and that, whatever. That's just in Columbus, which is about an hour from me. That's a relatively, I know that Columbus has, as most cities do, have some elite liberal bias, but that's a conservative area of the state. Southern Indiana is remarkable. There's a lot of Democrats in Southern Indiana, but they're not leftist Democrats. This is not a popular thing. This is an Anytown, USA sort of school district. But anyway, those sorts of things are happening, and they're happening for lots of reasons. They're happening because the people who educate our so-called teachers are woke lunatics in many instances. They're happening because when Democrats are in power, they create these things. They make these problems. They amplify the noise. And it's devastating. It's damaging. It's harmful to our youth. They act as though what's harmful is not acknowledging that they're a boy when they're biologically a girl or vice versa. But what's actually devastating is doing that, is playing along with the charade. But our state Senate here in Indiana thought, you know what? We want to look like we're bigger than the problem. So we'll let 2 Democrats go to Washington, D.C. to force these sorts of policies and this insanity on us. And that's the higher road. You tell me how it's the higher road when you're truly destroying the lives of children and lying to them with things straight from the pits of hell. You tell me that. I've not had, by the way, a single person take me up on my offer to tell me why it was morally wrong for Indiana to redistrict. I would love to have somebody do that. I welcome you on this program and we could talk about it. No one's taken me up, and it's been probably close to 5 months now. Well, it's been 4 full months, maybe close to 6 months. Anyway, so that's how this is the process, right? So every 10 years you redistrict. States do it. The legislature. Some states, because of the political fight that we're having, because of the importance of every single district in this upcoming election, some states have opted to redraw their districts in the middle of the decade, which they have the right to do unless their constitution or the state laws that they've passed in their states prohibit them from doing it. And this is where you get into the problems with the state of Virginia, because Virginia didn't follow their own rules. That's now in court. The Supreme Court of Virginia has heard oral arguments as of this Monday. They've not made a decision as of the time I'm talking to you now, but I'll tell you this. They said that it's got to be Basically, everything's frozen. Nothing's going to be implemented until we hash this out. That's basically what's happened in Virginia. But in Florida, they didn't have that problem because they don't have these other rules. Whatever rules existed, they complied with, I should say. And Florida passed new congressional maps. DeSantis is going to sign those into law. Texas has done the same. Missouri, Indiana, of course, wimped out for some virtue signaling reasons. That never ceases to amaze me. But Democrats have tried to do it as well. Of course, look at the Democrat states. They got to go through these referendums and so forth because under the guise that that's somehow more fair, whatever. This is an issue of constitutional power. States have the power, and they can do what they wish according to the Constitution. That's how it's done. If they want to make up other rules that limit that, fine. States have done it, including Virginia and California, and those rules may come back to bite them, especially in Virginia here, because they're not able to do. If the court follows the law, I don't see any way possible what happened in Virginia, going from a 6-5 Democrat advantage to 10-1 Democrat advantage. I don't see any way possible that stands up under scrutiny. So that's what's going on. Now, Louisiana versus Callais is a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about that. I want to kind of weave this all together today. That's what we're going to talk about here in the next segment. So, Louisiana has 6 congressional districts. After the 2020 census, Louisiana decided to keep a map that had one majority black district. Now, that's the first time I've mentioned race in this program, at least as it pertains to the districts. Probably at all here. I don't talk about it unless the left forces the issue here. But that matters for this discussion with the Supreme Court case, the Voting Rights Act, what they've pressured Louisiana to do, and so forth. So we're going to talk about it, pause it there as we get ready to go to the break, my friends. So let's face it, living with discomfort is tough. And while prescription medications can help, they come often with a long list of side effects, not to mention the risk of dependency. Many people are exploring natural options like Kratom from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. This is a family-run company. They do things the right way. They work directly with Indonesian farmers, lab test every batch to make sure that it is clean and it has no synthetics, no chemicals, no surprises, just honest, natural Kratom that's been used for generations. So, do your research. If you think it's a good thing for you to do, start with the Kratom Starter Pack. Code Todd Huff is going to save you 10% on your first purchase. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, time out for me, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. All right, so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this Supreme Court decision now. We've been talking about redistricting, what's happening politically, what happens in accordance with the Constitution every 10 years with the census, redistricting nationwide, the prerogative of states really to do this whenever they want unless there is a law or a constitutional amendment in their particular state that prohibits them from doing so. And so now there's another angle to this. And I mentioned before the break, it's in Louisiana. This was a Supreme Court case that was just ruled on yesterday, 6-3 on the side of the law, by the way, 6-3 majority ruling. So Louisiana has 6 congressional districts, and they did their 2020 census. This goes back, of course, a couple of years. And they drew their districts, and they drew one district intentionally that was a majority black district. Now let's pause for a moment. So there, according to the voting, there was something passed in 1965, I believe, called the Voting Rights Act. And as with most legislation, there are layers to this. There are different clauses. Sometimes it's different pages, different paragraphs, different sections of the law. And one of them has to do with race in districts. And it was decided, at least it's been argued since, that the Voting Rights Act, the VRA as it's sometimes referred to, was designed to make sure that states allowed, how do I say this the right way? States allowed minority groups, they drew their districts, they should draw their districts in such a way that minority groups could be the majority of at least one or a certain number of districts in a state. So, for example, in Louisiana, there's a percentage, a certain percentage, obviously, in any state, a certain percentage of, if you want to break it down this way, I'm not saying I'm a fan of this, but you, of course, can do it. A certain percentage of people who are white, a certain percentage of people who are black. And if memory serves me correctly, Louisiana has approximately 1/3 of its population that's black, according to the census. And so some people said, look, there's 6 districts. There's 33% black people who live, 33% of the population of Louisiana is black. Then we should have 1/3 of the congressional districts should be black, which 1/3 of 6 is, of course, 2 if you've taken basic math. I remember teaching our kids or helping teach our kids fractions. My wife, we homeschool. My wife does a lot. My wife does 99.9% of the work. I'm occasionally called in for things in the world of math, maybe science, or maybe if one of the kids is just, kind of button heads with the teacher, so to speak, which has happened. One child in particular that shall remain unnamed. But so we have this basic math here. So 1/3 of the population is black, and so some people say, well, look, you should have 1/3 of the districts that are majority black. Now just pause that for a moment and take away race, because race is such an emotional issue for people. And I understand to a point, because this country has made some egregious sins in her founding when it came to slavery. Now, I will also tell you that this country has fixed those problems. I also recognize fully that there are racists in this country today. You're not going to legislate racism away. There's always going to be racist. And by the way, I know this won't upset people in here with a brain, but if I've got someone who's an anti-racist or whatever they call it today, this might be very disturbing to hear, but people who are minority members of society based upon race can also be racist. I know I'm told that that's impossible because they don't hold the power. That's just patently absurd and ridiculous. What makes racism is whether or not it's racism, whether or not you hate a group of people because of their race. That's deplorable. That's despicable. That's ugly stuff. Anyway, but the argument stands that, hey, Louisiana should have 2 districts that are majority black because we've got 33% of the population that is black, which is just wild to me. It's wild to me on so many reasons. Number one, you want to talk about something that's racist, saying that the only person who can represent you in Congress is a person who's your same race. Well, what does that mean? How are we possibly going to do that in America today? Are we supposed to only divide districts by race? I mean, we had a whole thing about desegregation back in the 60s, right? Remember this? When the races were segregated, and then we desegregated. Now we're talking in a way of another form of segregation. We're Americans first. We're human beings first. I'll even take it a step before Americans. We're all human beings. We're all made in the image of Almighty God. We certainly have our differences, but there are a lot of things, shared commonalities that we have as people. And saying that the only way that you're properly represented is if you have someone in Congress who has the same skin color as you, who's in your district, is wild. Because there's no way to do that. There's no way. What do you do with mixed race family? It's wild stuff. But identity politics is so pushed down the throats of people that this is considered fair. Now, I will say, if politicians are trying to keep any group of people from having a political voice, that is problematic. That is problematic. And I understand that there could be people who say this is one way that people are doing that. It just practically it doesn't make any sense, especially when you have to match this with the reality that, hey, Congress has the state legislatures, have the prerogative. They have the responsibility, not just the prerogative, of drawing district maps. And they decided that they were going to have one majority black district instead of two. And so someone took this to court, and one of the courts said, basically the court, there were two different lawsuits going on here. One of them said you have to have a second district because you have 1/3 black citizens, so you should have 1/3 districts that are black, majority black districts. And then another court that said you can't be forcing districts to be drawn based upon race and making that the primary factor. In fact, that's ultimately what the Supreme Court ruled here, was that, hey, you cannot, these things are explicitly, I should say, political. And you can draw these districts based upon political preferences. Now, you shouldn't just draw them based upon race. In fact, if race is the primary factor, then that's where you get into trouble with violation of law and so forth. So the Supreme Court ruled that Louisiana doesn't have to do this, shouldn't have to do this. And now, of course, people are freaking out because they say, well, now the Voting Rights Act is thrown out the window. There's going to be racists running America again. By the way, this was 6-3. The three justices who ruled, who voted, who dissented would have been Sonia Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Elena Kagan. The six who voted to uphold, or to say that Louisiana doesn't have to draw race-based districts, or shouldn't be drawing race-based districts, would include Alito, who wrote the majority opinion. Of course, Clarence Thomas, who is black, by the way. That seems to only matter when someone is black and they are liberal or activists in their beliefs and policies. John Roberts was in there, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett. I think that's all of them. So that's how this broke down. So these things matter more than some people might think. So I've got some quotes from the decision, maybe the fallout of this as well. Lot to dissect here, but I will tell you, I think the Supreme Court is putting us back on the right track. I think the Trump administration is putting us back on the right track, but we've got one heck of a political fight on our hands. Friends, you've worked hard, you've made smart choices, and now it's time that you make sure your effort counts, not just for today, but for the years to come. Full Suite Wealth helps forward-thinking people with a coordinated approach to wealth, legacy, and legal planning, including private equity, private credit, and options strategies. They'll help you see the big picture, plan ahead, and make your success truly matter for the people you care about the most. The goal is to create a plan that stands the test of time. Head on over to FullSuiteWealth.com today, and they will help you build your legacy and secure your future. Quick time out for me, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I need to address this too. Yesterday I was out. I'll tell you, I'm fine, but I had every once in a while I'm susceptible, I should say, to getting migraines, and I had a migraine yesterday, so I was basically not working in the morning, so I do apologize for missing yesterday's program, my friends. But I'm fine. Everything's back. In fact, I was working in the afternoon. So I've learned if I identify it quickly enough, I know many of you suffer from these sorts of things as well. I never used to get these. As I've gotten older, I get them from time to time. My dad used to get them when he was younger. He used to get them and actually sometimes get sick, like vomiting and so forth. Thankfully, I've not had that. It can be incapacitating. It really can be. And mine are not nearly as bad as some of you out there, so I empathize with you on that. But that's where I was yesterday, so my apologies on that for missing. All right, so let's pull a couple of quotes from Alito's majority opinion here, talking about the court's ruling. He said this: Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was designed to enforce the Constitution, not to collide with it. He also said that lower courts have sometimes applied this court's Section 2 precedents. So he's referencing previous Supreme Court decisions that dealt with Section 2. That's the section specifically of the Voting Rights Act that this is all pertaining to. He says that some lower courts have sometimes applied this court's Section 2 precedents in a way that forces states to engage in the very race-based discrimination that the Constitution forbids. Allowing race, he says, to play any part in government decision-making represents a departure from the constitutional rule that applies in almost every other context. Compliance, he also says, with Section 2 thus could not justify the state's use of race-based redistricting here. The state's attempt, although understandable, was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. That's the majority of opinion. So if you don't know, and I know we have people in this audience who are experts in what's happening at the Supreme Court, what's the cases on the docket, where these you're just familiar with the ins and outs of what's been decided there, the oral arguments. I follow it, but not nearly to the extent that some of you might. I've had the pleasure of sitting through oral arguments I've shared with you before. I need to look up sometime. I don't remember the cases that we heard. Neither one of them were blockbuster cases, but my class, when I was in Washington 25 or so years ago, we went to the Supreme Court to hear oral arguments. We had to get up really early in the morning. It's beautiful. By about this time of year, it was April, if memory serves me. I remember the sunrise made the Capitol building kind of look pink in the morning. It was just a gorgeous, gorgeous setting, a great experience. And I heard two cases argued before the court, and it was interesting to me. It was the first time I was a younger guy. I didn't realize Clarence Thomas sits with his head, basically his head's tilted back. He's looking straight up with his eyes closed. I thought he had fallen asleep. Of course, that's not what he's doing. He's just listening to arguments. In fact, I do that sometimes. I close my eyes as I'm thinking and listening. Even if I'm in a public setting, sometimes it helps to clarify, to cut through all the other clutter and so forth. But it's a remarkable thing. But this, the Supreme Court, they hear these oral arguments, they ask questions in real time. I remember when I was when I attended, I remember Scalia was a justice, and he was ruthless. In fact, it's maybe the first and only time in my life I felt sorry for an attorney who was getting peppered with questions from Justice Antonin Scalia. And it's just an interesting thing to watch play out. They're dealing with interpreting the law. They're trying to reconcile how the law may say one thing and the Constitution has other principles. Obviously, if the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, so if a law is written that doesn't comply with the Constitution, it can be stricken down, or at least the part of it that conflicts with the Constitution can. And the court's trying to weigh this stuff out, and basically what they decided was, hey, the Constitution is not meant to be this document that allows us to do everything based on race. Yes, there were parts of the Constitution in our founding that we had to fix, pertaining to 3/5 compromise, all that stuff, right? 3/5 Black individuals were counted as 3/5 of a person. There was slavery, a bunch of things that had to be corrected over the course of time. But the document itself basically is talking about the people of the United States in general, and they're equal as one, regardless of their race and religion, and they're equal as individuals, I should say. They're not to be given certain advantages or disadvantages because of those things, because of their identity, or what people talk about as their primary identity today. This is one nation under the rule of law. It's blinded to, Lady Justice wears a blindfold. There's a reason for that. And that's what the court's saying here, is that, hey, you can't have it both ways. This Constitution is meant to be applied broadly to all people. And now you're saying that certain groups need to make sure that they have a majority opportunity in districts. That's not in the spirit of what this is. I gotta go. Out of time, my friends. SDG.